Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So in this one we're going to continue working on the Craftsman Pie Cupboard. So in the first one we went over how to mill lumber for handcrafted furniture like this. And so all of our pieces for our face and our side frames are all nicely milled up. They're all nice, perfectly square and straight, and we're all good to go to start working on the actual joinery and starting to put this thing together. And so what we're going to be working on today is these two pieces right here. I know it's hard to see on camera because they're kind of blown out, but this one is going to be the whole front frame, and this one is the side frame. And so the first thing we need to do is to cut all of our pieces to length. So these are going to be our vertical pieces. We've got two different types. We've got our front ones, which are a little bit narrower, and our side ones, which are wider. And we're going to be cutting all of these to 50 and 7/8 long. Now, this was the first challenge of this project, and something that I have to kind of figure out. Because my table saw, the fence is a 36-inch fence, so I can measure out 36 inches right at the blade. Fully, if I take the fence off, I can go about 50 inches to hitting the wall on the right side of my table saw blade. So in order to cut this 50 and 7/8, I'm going to have to use the left side of my blade, which offers less support for the workpiece, but kind of infinite space long. And so the way I'm going to go about doing this is I'm going to start by squaring up one end on the table saw, which is a super easy thing to do. You just pass it through. Then once we know we have one edge that is perfectly square to the rest of the board, then I'll measure with my tape measure and mark a line at 50 and 7/8. And then rather than using a pencil to mark my line, I'm going to use my marking knife. This will give me a much more accurate line to try and cut to and give me generally more precision over these long lengths. And so with our stock down to its final lengths now, all of our pieces are now cut out and they're ready to go to start doing the joinery on it. So the joinery is going to be a little bit more of the complicated part. And so our main form of joinery to actually connect all these pieces together is going to be mortise and tenon. Then to connect our side panels to our front, we're going to be putting bevels along the outer sides or the outer edges of the side pieces, and then connecting those like making a big box. And so there's a very easy way to double check that all of our pieces are actually cut to the same length. I know that all my small pieces are cut to the proper lengths because I set up a stop block and cut them that way. But for my long pieces, all I'm going to do is just set them on a fairly flat surface, push all the edges together with a square, and then I can just check the other edge. And so I've done this a couple times now, and I've done the little touch-ups here and there that I need to do, so now they're all the exact same length. There might be a very small margin of error, but it's nothing that I can visually tell. And in woodworking, most of the time, visually is as close, as accurate as you need to go. And so we're going to be starting with the mortise and tenons. Now the mortises are all going to be going into these long pieces, which makes it fairly easy. Now I'm going to be doing this with my router. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You could do it by hand if you wanted to, or you could do it with a mortiser. But I've never had luck with mortisers. You know, I bought one a little while ago and then returned it because I couldn't actually get it to work. So you have to have a pretty good mortiser to work with something like white oak, and I don't really feel like spending the money on one of them right now. So we're going to be doing it with a router, and so because we're working with such narrow stock, and my router is a fairly large router, I'm going to be putting two pieces in my Moxon vise at once, making sure that they're all flat and level with each other, and then we'll be able to plunge down, cut a mortise on one side, turn the router around, plunge down, cut the mortise on the other side. And so because I also want to get these mortises perfectly centered in the piece, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it that way. Then once I've got the mortises all cut in one way doing that, then I'll just flip my pieces around and repeat the process to widen up the mortises just a little bit. So we're going to be using a 1/4 inch bit, and we're going to be going for just over a 1/4 inch mortise. That way they will end up being perfectly centered in the board, and it's much easier to just work with it that way. So I've got all my layout lines marked out, so I know exactly where I'm going to be cutting these mortises. The idea of putting the knife lines in there is so that once I have these mortises roughed out with the router, I'm then going to go in with the 1/4 inch mortising chisel and just clean up right to that line so that all of my mortises are the same width, or they're a more predictable width. If you just go off the router, it can be a little bit more difficult to get an accurate positioning on those mortises. Whereas as soon as you start cleaning them up with the chisel, it just makes it a lot more accurate, in my opinion. And so to cut these mortises, we're going to be using this jig that I just kind of threw together a long time ago when I first started doing this. And so basically it's just a piece of acrylic screwed onto the base of my plunge router, and then you've got these 2 white oak guide blocks that will close in tight around our pieces, and that'll help align the bit and keep it riding in the exact same area every single time. And again, because we have this in the Moxon vise and held with some extra clamps on the end, these pieces are going to be held together nice and firmly. Okay, so we've got our frames dry fit together. I tried to put them together on camera and it was just kind of a pain in the butt. You can see they're not fully seated up because I still have a little bit more work to do. I just want to do an initial dry fit to see how my progress was going. But you can see here that we've got everything together in a structural form. So we've got our 2 side frames here and then our face frame on the back of the pile. And so everything is fairly stable. They're all kind of staying together up on their own accord, just for kind of the tension of the mortises. But everything is holding together nicely. And so our next step is to cut the offset groove that's going to hold our floating panel into the side panel. And so the reason we're going to be doing an offset panel, which just means that the panel is going to be closer to one side than the other, is because we're going to be putting dados across the inside section that is going to be supporting our shelves. We're also going to be adding dowels in to really hold the shelves in securely, but by putting the dados in, that gives us a place to align the shelves as well as a little bit of extra support. And so I don't want those dados to interact with the floating panel that's going to be in here. And so I want to make sure that when I'm cutting the groove along the inside of this frame, that it's offset a little bit towards the front edge. We're also going to be cutting the bevel on the front edge of our side pieces and then both sides of our front frame. Now, there's 2 ways you can do this theoretically. One way would be you can wait till you've glued everything up, and then you can try and pass your panels through the table saw. You could do it that way. It probably would offer a little bit more accuracy. You could get your thing to the proper exact width that you want. But I'm just going to do it with the separate pieces because it seems like a little bit safer to me that I don't have to try and manage, especially with the face frame. That is a very wide piece. I don't want to try to have to pass that whole thing through my table saw to cut off this little bevel on the end. So by just cutting the pieces, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with. And so one thing I will say before we get going with this is that you need to make sure that when you're cutting a long grain bevel, so up the whole front face of these pieces, especially in something like white oak, but even in cherry, walnut, whatever it may be, you need to be using a designated ripping blade. So this is a 24 tooth ripping blade. If you don't know what one of these looks like, you'll see it in the video upcoming here, or I talked about it more in the first part of this series in the milling video. But you need to be using one of these because there's going to be so much wastage material removed. A combination blade will not work, and especially in white oak, because it's so hard, you need to make sure that nothing is stopping the blade, nothing is going to bind on the blade, and that excess piece that's going to be cut off, you need to make sure that the blade has the least possible chance of binding and catching on that piece, because there's a nice little dent in my garage door there that came from trying to use a combination blade to cut one of these, a long grain bevel like we're going to be cutting here. So this can be somewhat dangerous. If that piece falls, it can get kicked back really hard, really fast, and can cause a lot of damage. So again, make sure you're using a designated ripping blade because it will make the job so much safer. And so just like that, we have all the frames connected together. So this is all our main joinery for the actual thing here. The last thing is going to be doing the dovetail, or the half line dovetail. It's going to be holding the backside for here together. Because right now you can see that the backside wants to pull away from it, but we want to make sure that it can't. So we're just going to be putting a piece across here, and that's what we're going to be cutting next. But to put this thing together, just for a quick dry fit, I wanted to use some of this green tape to just kind of hold the bevels together, and then I just wrapped it around to make sure that they couldn't open on themselves. And so I wasn't able to pull it fully together. You can kind of see here how there's a big gap. Because on the front face frame, I have to actually hammer it together. I didn't want to be hammering on this miter until it's glued up, because right now there are fibers that can split because those edges are so thin. As soon as it's glued, those fibers will be reinforced and it'll be fine to hammer together. Plus, I'm going to go stop and get some 48-inch clamps at some point in time here. I don't have any for some reason, but I really need to get some. So I'm going to buy a couple 48-inch pipes to put into my pipe clamps, which will allow me to actually clamp these frames together, or the face frame together, when it comes time to do so. And so this is exactly how it's going to look once it's all together. You can see we've got our top section for our drawers, which we still need to cut our drawer divider piece here. But other than that, we've got our spot for our two drawers, and then we've got our center section where we're going to have our doors, our actual cabinet area. And so overall, it's looking pretty good. Okay, so since the last time I talked to you guys, a lot of stuff has changed. The plan is kind of just totally and outright changed. So, what I ended up doing here is I don't remember what I mentioned the first or last time I talked to you guys, which you guys can rewind if you forgot to. But basically, I think that I said that I was going to put the side panels together, or fit the side panels, the walnut side panels. Then I was going to glue up the bevels. Then I was going to cut the dados, something to that extent. And so what I figured out is what I was going to try and do first was cut our half-blind dovetail back stretcher, which in order to do that, to find the actual measurement of the piece that I need, I had to fully clamp it up. So I went out, I got some 48-inch long pipe clamps, or some pipes for my pipe clamps, and I was just going to clamp the front together. But then I remembered that as I started doing that, you can't clamp unglued miters. You just end up breaking the fibers, which I did slightly on there because I had a dumb moment. And yeah, so it's nothing bad. It's nothing that's going to seriously impact the overall finished look of this, because I'm going to be putting a decent little bevel on the front of this thing on those mitered corners. Just to make sure that they don't crack or anything in the future. You're not even going to notice those few damaged fibers. And so what I've decided to do is I have to glue up the bevels before I can actually fit that side panel, because I need something to be able to clamp to hold this thing together while I'm trying to fit up that panel. It's really hard to fit a floating panel with cove profiles on it when your pieces are falling apart in that. So you need to be able to either glue them up or clamp them up. And so in this case, I'm going to have to clamp them. So then before I can actually clamp up the bevels, which I almost glued up the bevels without cutting the dados, which would have been absolutely world ending and project ending in this case. I probably could have figured out a way to do it, but it wouldn't have worked out as nicely as for what I want. And so I've gone in and put in all the dados for our shelves that are actually going to be our main shelf supports. And so in these dados, I'm also going to be drilling in some holes here pretty quickly. That's where we're going to be driving our dowels through. And so the idea with these dados is they're only cut to about a 1/2 inch wide, well, exactly a 1/2 inch wide, because my dado stack is actually nice and accurate. But they're cut to a 1/2 inch wide, and we're going to be making 3/4 inch shelves. So what we're going to end up doing is we're just going to end up rabbiting around our shelves on the top side so that we get a nice overlap and it covers up any gnarliness here. And so what I found actually cutting these dados is this Oshlin dado stack that I got off Amazon actually works really nice. Because it's a 42 tooth dado stack, it leaves a really clean final finish cut. The only place that it kind of struggled was doing the rabbets on our back legs here. And so you can see on the back legs, we did rabbets the whole way up, even all the way down to where the feet are going to end up being in the end. And so the reason I did that is because I want the panel to go all the way down to the floor. I'm probably going to end it, maybe 1/8 of an inch from actually sitting on the floor, but I wanted it to be all the way down there so that you have just a nice solid back panel. And so now we have a solid functional case. Everything is going to stay fairly well together. We have these dovetails pulling everything together at the back. Our front is already nice and solid joints on there. Now we just have to glue up all the tenons. So this is going to be a really easy process to actually get this all together, surprisingly enough. It's really just going to be, you know, gluing up the face frame, gluing up the sides, and then throwing this in. Then once we have all that together, we can throw in our shelves and everything will be fairly simple. So this is where we're going to end this video. We've made really good progress. I mean, this is way more progress than I was planning to get done in this video. I was going to break it up more, but I figured why not just go for it, get it done. And yeah, so in the next video, we're actually going to be doing the floating panels. I know I said we were going to do it in this video, but I want to save it for the next video because it is kind of a useful thing to see and learn. So, and the next video is going to be kind of short, but we are going to be doing some fun stuff. And so the next video is going to involve this wonderful yellow liquid. I don't want to give away what it is, but it has something to do with white oak and aging it slightly. So anyway, that is going to do it for this video though. So I do hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.